The year was 1773. A chill settled upon Boston Harbor, and it wasn't just the December air. The simmering resentment against British rule had finally boiled over. The Sons of Liberty, cloaked in shadows and fueled by righteous anger, boarded the East India Company ships. They hurled chests of tea, symbols of British tyranny, into the icy depths. This act of defiance, a resounding no to unfair taxation, echoed throughout the colonies. The British response was swift and brutal. Parliament, outraged by this audacious act of rebellion, sought to make an example of Massachusetts. They aimed to crush the spirit of defiance, to remind the colonists who held the reins of power. The Coercive Acts, as they were called by the British, aimed to bring the unruly colonists to heel. But they would soon discover that they had misjudged the spirit of America. These acts, instead of quelling the rebellion, would fan the flames of revolution. The colonists did not see themselves as rebels, not yet. They saw themselves as Englishmen unjustly targeted, stripped of their rights, denied a voice in their own governance. The Coercive Acts were not mere laws. They were a declaration of war on the very soul of liberty. The Coercive Acts were a series of punitive measures designed to punish Massachusetts and deter further dissent. Each act was a blow against colonial liberty, a tightening of the grip of British control. These acts, passed in quick succession, aimed to isolate Boston, strip Massachusetts of its self-governance, and assert British dominance over the colonies. First came the Boston Port Act. It was a stranglehold on the city's very lifeblood. Then followed the Massachusetts Government Act, dismantling the colony's charter and placing it under direct royal control. The Administration of Justice Act shielded British officials from colonial courts, granting them impunity for their actions. Finally, the Quartering Act, a dreaded reminder of standing armies in times of peace, allowed British troops to occupy colonial homes. Each act was a nail hammered into the coffin of colonial freedom, pushing the colonies closer to the brink. But with each blow, the resolve of the colonists hardened. The Boston Port Act was the first blow, a calculated strike at the heart of Massachusetts' economy. It closed the port of Boston to all shipping until the colonists paid for the destroyed tea. This act crippled the bustling port, throwing thousands into unemployment. Merchants saw their businesses crumble, sailors were left idle, and the once thriving city descended into economic chaos. The wharves, once teeming with life, stood eerily silent. Ships lay at anchor, unable to unload their goods. The air, once thick with the scent of salt and commerce, now carried the weight of despair. Families struggled to put food on the table. The act, intended to isolate Boston, had the opposite effect. It unified the colonies in ways the British could never have anticipated. From north to south, messages of support and supplies poured into Boston. The other colonies understood that Boston's plight could easily become their own. They rallied behind their brethren, sending aid and defiance in equal measure. The Massachusetts Government Act was a direct assault on the colony's autonomy. It revoked the colony's charter, effectively stripping it of its right to self-govern. The act replaced the elected council with one appointed by the Crown. Town meetings, once vibrant forums for debate and decision-making, were now prohibited. The colonists watched in dismay as their hard-won rights were stripped away. Their elected officials were replaced by Crown appointees, often strangers to their concerns. The voice of the people, once a powerful force in their governance, was silenced. This act struck at the very heart of colonial identity. It was a clear message. The colonies were not to govern themselves, but to be governed, controlled, and subjugated. The spirit of the Mayflower Compact of self-reliance and self-determination seemed to be fading under the shadow of British tyranny. Yet the embers of defiance still glowed. The colonists had tasted freedom, and they would not relinquish it easily. Section 5. The Administration of Justice Act, a shield for British authority. The Administration of Justice Act was perhaps the most insidious of the Coercive Acts. This act stipulated that British officials accused of crimes in the colonies could be tried in England instead of in the colonies. It was a blatant attempt to shield British officials from colonial courts, where they feared they might face juries sympathetic to the colonists. This act further fueled colonial anger and distrust, creating a two-tiered system of justice, one for the rulers and another for the ruled. The colonists saw it for what it was, a license for British officials to act with impunity. It reinforced the perception that they were subjects, not citizens, denied the basic rights of Englishmen. The act cast a long shadow over the colonies, further eroding trust in British rule. It was a constant reminder that they were subject to the whims of a distant and uncaring parliament. The colonists, accustomed to a degree of self-rule and a justice system rooted in their own communities, found this act particularly abhorrent. The Quartering Act, though not directly aimed at Massachusetts, added further fuel to the fire. It required colonists to provide housing and provisions for British troops stationed in the colonies, even in private homes if necessary. This act, a violation of their privacy and a constant reminder of British military might, stoked resentment and fear. The sight of redcoats patrolling their streets, occupying their homes, was a constant affront to their sense of liberty. It brought the reality of British rule into their homes, making the conflict feel all too personal. The colonists saw it as a blatant attempt to intimidate them, to stifle dissent under the watchful eyes of armed soldiers. Stories of soldiers overstepping their bounds, of families forced to share their homes with unwelcome guests, spread like wildfire. The act, intended to ensure the comfort and readiness of British troops, had the opposite effect. It served as a constant reminder of their subjugation, fueling the flames of rebellion that were already burning bright. The Coercive Acts had a profound and unintended consequence. They unified the colonies. From the streets of Boston to the plantations of Virginia, a sense of shared outrage and solidarity took hold. What began as a local conflict over tea had transformed into a continental crisis of identity and liberty. Committees of correspondence, established to share news and coordinate resistance, became vital links between the colonies. The cry of Boston is suffering, and we must stand with her, resonated throughout the land. Donations poured in from as far south as Georgia and as far north as New Hampshire. The colonies, once divided by geography and local interests, now found common ground in their opposition to British tyranny. The Coercive Acts had inadvertently laid the groundwork for a unified resistance. They had awakened a sleeping giant, and the British lion would soon feel its wrath. The Coercive Acts proved to be a turning point on the road to revolution. They marked a decisive shift from protest to defiance, from loyal subjects seeking redress to a people determined to forge their own destiny. The First Continental Congress, convened in Philadelphia in the fall of 1774, was a direct result of the growing unease and anger sparked by the Coercive Acts. Delegates from 12 colonies, united in their opposition to British policies, gathered to discuss their grievances and strategize a collective response. The Congress, a testament to the spirit of unity fostered by the Coercive Acts, affirmed its loyalty to the Crown while also asserting its right to self-government. They drafted a declaration of rights and grievances, petitioning the king for a redress of their grievances. They agreed to boycott British goods, a powerful economic weapon aimed at forcing the British to reconsider their policies. The Congress, while hoping for a peaceful resolution, also recognized the need to prepare for the possibility of war. The Coercive Acts, intended to subdue the colonies, had the opposite effect. They ignited a firestorm of resistance that would culminate in the American Revolution. They stand as a testament to the enduring power of ideas like liberty and self-determination, ideas that resonated deeply within the American soul. The echoes of the Coercive Acts can be felt even today. They serve as a reminder of the fragility of freedom and the importance of vigilance in safeguarding it. They remind us that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance, a vigilance against tyranny in all its forms. The story of the Coercive Acts is a story of resistance, of a people unwilling to bow to tyranny. It is a story that continues to inspire, urging us to stand up for what is right, to fight for our freedoms, and to never take our liberty for granted. The echoes of rebellion ignited by the Coercive Acts continue to resonate through the halls of history, reminding us of the enduring power of the human spirit in its quest for freedom.